And for the next speaker, I would like to welcome our second keynote speaker, Snick, who is a member of the SeeRRI Advisory Board. Snick is a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, member of the Club of Rome. She is an independent researcher, and throughout her career, she combined academic research with transdisciplinary fieldwork, including women in poverty as research expert. So the topic Anne will bring to us today is about reconsidering the nexus between development, innovation, and sustainability. So the floor is yours. And by the way, please scan the Slido code so that you can put questions for Anne after her speech.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I'll take off my mouth mask if that is okay. I can't speak. Regional development and innovation strategy towards sustainability. I see three words here: development, innovation, and sustainability. And I think part of the learnings of this project and other projects that I'm involved in, especially on responsible research and innovation, is to reconsider how these three concepts are linked together. And to trigger that reflection, I'd like to start with a story. It's described by Jared Diamond in the book Collapse. And it describes how in medieval Greenland there was temporarily a milder climate, and there were some green valleys with forests, and the Vikings come floating by with their boats, and they're always looking for new territories to occupy. So they decide to settle on Greenland. And there's already an Inuit community living on Greenland. And the Inuit are hunter-gatherers. They live with what nature has to offer, and their entire culture is based on that. And interestingly, the Viking do not adopt the Inuit lifestyle and technologies, but they're bringing their European technologies, economies, etc. So they chop the trees to make pastures for their cows. They say, like, we're not hunter-gatherers, we are farmers, we produce our own food, rather than just taking the offerings, the gifts from nature. They built beautiful houses, even beautiful cathedrals. Apparently, they had their big ships where they could import materials that were not locally available, etc. So if we look at those two cultures, I think, from our perspective, most people agree that the Vikings are the more advanced civilization because they have more advanced technologies. Their economic system is more developed, etc. So we would call that progress, from hunter-gatherers to, the progress of humanity as exemplified by the Vikings. But then if we look at the timeline, after less than half a century, the Viking community totally collapsed, they starved to death, whereas the Inuit community thrived happily ever after. And so, sorry, there were some, apparently some of my slides have been squished a little bit, but what we see there, on the left-hand side, the biophysical conditions of life, and there's little sunlight at that altitude, so the trees grow very slowly. So the Viking were chopping the trees much faster than they could regrow. So they were exceeding that ceiling, that blue line of the biophysical capacities of that region. And as long as there were buffers there, as long as there were good soils and forests, they could fool themselves into thinking that, look what beautiful cathedrals we achieve here, and look how beautiful cow's meat we have here. But of course, once your trees are gone, your soil washes away, and then, there's no more agriculture possible at all. And so they starved to death, and apparently until the last findings of their stay on Greenland, there is no single sign of them using seafood or trading with the Inuit or learning from the Inuit at all, which is a very intriguing question. So we can agree that it was not an ecological disaster. If it would have been an ecological disaster, then the Inuit would also have vanished. It was also not a technological problem, because the technologies were there. The Inuit had them. The Inuit, had everything they needed to have a happy, healthy, etc. life. It was only their narratives, their idea that they were more advanced, that they were not hunter-gatherers, but more advanced people, that Europeans, have, are more sophisticated or whatever. And so, I mean, this is sophisticated. I always discuss that with the students, and they always come up with the same. The technology was there, the food was there, but they rather starved to death than learn from the people they considered less developed. So the next question, of course, is, are we wiser than the Vikings? Vikings, that was like 800. We've moved on more than 1,000 years. We have incredible universities and innovation systems. We must be wiser than the Vikings. So look at the next slide. On the bottom line of this graph, you see the United Nations Human Development Index. It's a combined metrics of education, health, food, housing, and safety. And all countries are ranked on a scale from 1 to 10. So we have our definition of what we call the good life is scaled from 1 to 10. The metrics are there. And then on the vertical line, you see the planetary footprint required for achieving that level of development. And all the little dots on the slide are countries. The red ones are European countries. So interestingly, not a single country that we call highly developed remains within planetary boundaries. We're doing exactly the same as the Viking. Whereas all the countries that are within planetary boundaries are called underdeveloped or in development because we're so good, we want them all to join us on our pathway of development and progress. But you can see here it's totally not sustainable. So the link between progress, development, and sustainability requires a very, very deep reflection. So we're now, as the Vikings collapsed here, we've had Code Red for Humanity issued just a couple of weeks ago. And this was just for climate, and I'm not going to talk about the other metrics. So what we learned from that, of course we will need, here again I use the same colors, you have the narrative of progress, the yellow line, what do we, the values, what do we value in life, what do we call the good life, and how do we relate to nature. Then the blue line is the technologies and the economies that we use for that, and there we just totally neglect the reality of the planet. And so that's where the collapse comes from. There's this disconnect between the reality of Earth, of the reality of life on this planet, and the economy and technology that we use to access the offerings of nature. So what we've come up with, through all the research projects and education projects that I've done, is that we really, if we want to avoid the blind spot, the Viking didn't see it coming. They didn't see the collapse coming. But now we are smarter because we know it's coming. And we know we can change it. But what it requires and why it is so difficult, as Johan has just really clearly explained, what we need, we have our innovation systems have been built since the last 200 years, universities, etc., with a separatist lens. Humans and nature are considered separate domains. Nature is just considered a resource for humans to exploit. We're not considered as part of nature. We're on top of the evolution. We can control nature, we can manipulate it for our needs. And so what we did very successfully, like the Vikings, very successfully, we focused our science on the parts of nature that are stable and controllable. You can measure, there are certain things that you can measure and express in mathematical formulas, and that allows you to technically control it and improve it. So we've done that with an incredible success, look at what we can do. But what we didn't see was how it would affect the ecosystem, the poverty, the climate. That was the blind spot. So fooling ourselves into, look how successful we are, our model of development, we're so happy and we want everybody to be as happy as us, has blinded us for the larger map, because we're always focusing on the controllable part of nature and not on the part of nature that is now, throwing the boomerang back in our face. So if we have to make progress today, I think what we need is to develop this we call it the bifocal glasses. You do need, of course, you need to know, it may be useful to know DNA and technology and artificial intelligence and all that, but it's only responsible if you also see the bigger picture. Take the example of antibiotics. It was made in a laboratory where, the stable, a laboratory is a closed system, stable elements of nature where you can control the variables. We find a very successful technology, antibiotics, but then we roll them out in the open system of society. And again, we think like, wow, we're successful in the laboratory, so the more we do that linearly, the more health we will create. And now we have created the largest risk for human health ever, called like that by the World Health Organization, are the antibiotics. So again, it's a man-made disaster because we didn't see the bigger picture, how it will affect the immune system, how it will affect mutations, how it will affect the groundwater, et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't see the bigger system, the bigger picture of what is a sustainable world on this planet and what values can contribute to that, then you can never do responsible research and innovation. You can do something small scale, find on a small scale that it works well, but when you roll it out, you're as blind as the Vikings. Unless you first, look at the bigger picture. And that, of course, cannot be done from a laboratory because it's open, it's dynamic, life is constantly evolving. Nobody has predicted even the financial crisis of 2008 or the pandemic. Well, it was predicted that if we continue like that, there would be pandemics, but it was not like built into the system that we would fear around that. So we need the specialist focus with the innovation, the technology, the 3D printing, all that, but it will only help us to survive on this planet sustainably and happily if we also create spaces for looking at the systemic focus, at the larger, the organic worldview, where we're part of nature, we're not in control of entropy, we're not in control of weather patterns, we're not in control of the fluctuations of the sea, etc. Forget it, we're not. We're part of that and we'd better be wise. So learning together and co-creating the future that society wants with all stakeholders involved. It's not, the first part is exclusive. It's only the specialists that can do that because it requires a lot of technical knowledge, etc. But the second part is, what society do we want? And that is where I think, with this picture, you can say, well, RRI, can also be approached with two different lenses, and they are complementary. It's not either or. We need both of them. The bifocal glasses, if I would not have the narrow focus, I would not be able, I would stumble over every stone, but if I did not see the far horizon, I would see every stone, but I wouldn't see where I was going. So we need both lenses. And we have now a system that is focused only on the narrow lens, on the specialist lens. So what we have, I'm not going to read all this, but the first part is the add-on. We have the established analyzing and controlling nature, anthropocentric, humans are in control of nature, lab is a closed system. So what we need, for sustainability now is increased technical sophistication, like electric cars or whatever it is, add on the criteria for RRI, and so we're doing more of the same, but we're just going to count the women, explain to the citizens, blah, blah, blah. Whereas the bigger lens, the wider lens is the planet is a very complex system and you can't find out how it works in a laboratory. You can only find out how it works if you're out there. Experiential learning. We're aligned with, the lab is an open system. It's by being in nature and or being in cities, in regions, regions where we know what the water does, how the winds are, what the soil is like. There you can really see the bigger picture. And of course, the challenge today is that the regions are connected to the globe, due to globalization. What we do here has an impact on the global south. So it becomes really, looking at everything. So what we do is not create a lab, but is create context for co-creating a more desirable future state. And everybody has to go there, as long as we have yellow jackets who can't feel that they can't move forward, we're not going to move forward. So again, as Johan said, technology is not the aim in itself, but it's at the service, it's a means at the service of this vision. And if it means, for example, that we achieve a certain vision, it might be that nanotechnology helps us to get there, but maybe not. Nanotechnology is not a goal in itself. It might be helpful, or it might be, I don't know, the next health issue. So here we co-create alternative pathways with all other actors for the common good. The common good is human survival today, and human survival will depend on the survival of all other species. So the non-living beings are part of the commons. So that's why I always call RRI co-RRI. It's complexity-based, co-creative, and common good oriented. So if it is not co-RRI, it will probably be in the top zone there. It will be an improvement of the narrow lens, but it will not allow you to see the bigger lens. So, it is instead, the top one would be the innovation system becoming responsible, whereas the other one, the second layer is innovating the system by creating these additional spaces where we can overview the bigger lens. And now, very often, sorry, there's a little error in my. So very often, like the cartoon on the left says, the simple answers are wrong, but it's the easiest pathway. We're all used to that. We do, we're trained to do that. Whereas if you want to pursue the more complex solutions, it's going to be a lonely and difficult and steep pathway, but that is wrong. In fact, co-creating solutions for a sustainable world is a lot of fun. It brings people together, it touches their heart. Some people, even in this team, witness that all of a sudden you feel reconnected with nature, you feel reconnected with life, you feel reconnected with other people if you leave your narrow laboratory and join that co-creative endeavor with that vision of a sustainable world we have now as an opportunity. We have the European Green Deal, and it requires a very transformative shift. So I would say RRI on a territorial level, but in connection with the global agenda. Let's go there. Let's go out of the laboratories. Let's create open laboratories, including everybody, even the non-human species. They are part of our living ecosystem. And together, if we are kind to nature, nature will be kind to us. So thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions now too. Should I stay? Oh, come here.
I'll just stand now. Thank you. So I just want to remind you again the QR code, and if you want to insert the number, it's 528594. So Anna, thank you so much for your inspiring speech, and that is the reason why you are so important to be here with us in person, to inspire us by your appearance and your speech, and because you actually bring a very special energy to make people feel very engaged and understand the urgency of how we can co-create for RRI. And when waiting for the question, I actually have one question for you. You has pointed out the blind spot, and you think innovation lens is the way to help us to solve the blind spot. And I want to ask for your experience. I know that it's so challenging to escape the exploitation mode, to go for exploration and innovation. Do you have any tips or experience how you can help others to escape that exploitation efficiency focus mode? Thank you.
I think it's there's a famous curve of sustainability that shows is based on research into sustainable systems, technical systems, ecological systems, social systems, and all sustainable systems appear to have a similar structure, and that is a balance between two opposite characteristics. One characteristic is called resilience or freedom, or exploring different pathways, and the other one is ascendancy or efficiency, mainstreaming the pathways. And interestingly, the most efficient systems have like 60% of creative, open, very divergent, redundant pathways, and only 40% of streamlined pathways. It's like if you would have like a tree plantation for furniture, if you'd have only, say, oak trees for oak furniture, that would be very, very efficient, but as soon as, it would be on the right of your curve. But if you have a disease or the market demand changes, your business has collapsed. So by diversifying your wood, having more difference, you will be able to absorb those shocks. But of course, if you go too much to the resilient side and it becomes a jungle where you lose all your overhead in trying to find the useful wood, you're not going to be sustainable either. So finding that right, that's the governance, finding that right balance between streamlining, controlling, and being open and creative and diverge and you know, use your fantasy and imagination to imagine that we might go to a world with no fossil fuels. It's a very difficult one, but you know, use that imagination. And then the second tip is, if you look at, you know, the left-hand side, it's teaming, but really teaming with people and initiatives that are doing that. They're stepping out of the system. They're being regenerative entrepreneurs, benefit corporations, cooperatives, We Share Festival. I mean, I just get overwhelmed every day. The Learning Festival, Learning Planet Festival, it's happening. What we need is for it to achieve, increase its ascendancy, to become part of the system. It's still, you know, the dominant system. The universities are still, each in their faculties, teaching the knowledge rather than envisioning and going out, you know, teaching, transmitting the knowledge. So we need to join forces. So the first thing is go and look in your area for everybody who's interested in doing something else. And it could be NGOs, it could be active citizens, it could be researchers that are frustrated in the university, it's entrepreneurs, it's political leaders, and you join, you know, joining forces makes meta-resilience. And then, you know, it gets so much fun to sort of like discover like, wow, we want the same, we have the same goal. And I don't really, that's where I disagree with Johan. For me, it's not in terms of, you know, indicators and metrics that we can then say, did we achieve the goal? It's much more in terms of a horizon. Are we moving towards the horizon? Because, as you know, the system is complex. It's gonna be constantly reacting to your interventions, and so you have to sort of like dance the system. Like, okay, now we know that, you know, this rebound effect is occurring. We did not foresee that. We forgot to include in our systems map other actors. So it's an ongoing process. It's not like, here we find the answer, you know, we found the solution in the lab and now society will implement it. That's how we create a disaster like the, you know, like the antibiotics. It's an ongoing, it's a constant learning process. Learning and innovation are the same thing. Learning to adapt, learning how to become part of. And knowing that there's so many people already doing that and open to do that and joining forces with them, it will make you really happy. So if that is an answer to Nin's question, this is something that you can definitely do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anne. And so we have received some question from the Slido code, but we will send it to you later through, and then we will publish the answer on the website. So thank you so much again for being with us. And big applause for Anna. Thank you.